I'm Sophia, 27, and last Friday at what was supposed to be a celebration dinner, my mother announced the family's upcoming Italy vacation with the words, "Italy's for those who contribute to this family." As she looked around the table making eye contact with everyone except me, the silence was deafening. What Mom didn't know was that I had been secretly funding their entire lifestyle for 3 years, including the $15,000 family emergency fund they had just spent on this Italian adventure that I wasn't invited to join. But the real shock came when I discovered the family group chat called Sophia's Wallet, where they had been planning this exclusion for months, while calculating exactly how much more money they could extract from me before the trip. That night, I made a decision that would turn their dream vacation into their worst financial nightmare. Before we dive into the story of ultimate family betrayal and the revenge that followed, I'm dying to know your thoughts. What do you think happens when a family's secret ATM discovers she's been deliberately excluded from the vacation she unknowingly funded? Do you think they panicked when their money source disappeared, or did they somehow try to blame me for their predicament? Drop your predictions in the comments, hit that like button if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. And make sure to subscribe because this tale of financial manipulation and sweet karma will show you exactly what happens when entitled relatives learn that their actions have consequences. Trust me, the ending will leave you cheering for justice and questioning everything about unconditional family support. Growing up as the eldest daughter in the Martinelli household meant learning early that love was measured in sacrifice, and sacrifice was measured in dollars. While my younger twin brothers Marco and Luca were encouraged to pursue their dreams and passions without financial worry, I was taught that my success was a family asset to be managed and distributed according to collective needs rather than individual achievement. The pattern began when I landed my first real job at 19, a marketing internship at a local tech startup. Instead of celebrating my accomplishment, Mom's first reaction was calculating relief. "Thank God," she said, "now we won't have to worry so much about money." The assumption that my income would automatically become family income was presented not as a request, but as a natural law of Italian family loyalty. In our culture, family comes first. Dad would remind me whenever I showed any reluctance to hand over my paycheck. "Your success is our success. Your money helps everyone." This is how we've done things for generations. The guilt was wrapped in cultural pride, making it nearly impossible to resist without feeling like I was betraying not just my family, but my heritage itself. By the time I graduated college and landed a lucrative position as a digital marketing manager in San Francisco, the financial dependency had become so normalized that nobody questioned the arrangement. I was earning $78,000 annually, living in an expensive city, but sending $2,500 monthly back to my family in Sacramento while barely scraping by in a studio apartment I shared with a roommate. The twins, now 24, had never been expected to contribute anything meaningful to household finances. Marco was pursuing his art with expensive photography equipment I had purchased, while Luca was finding himself through a series of unpaid internships and recreational activities that required constant funding for equipment, classes, and experiences. When they needed money, they asked Mom, who immediately called me with elaborate explanations about why these requests were actually investments in their future potential. "Marco's photography business is really taking off," Mom would say, requesting funds for a $3,000 camera lens. "He just needs professional equipment to attract serious clients." The fact that Marco had never had a paying photography client in 3 years was never mentioned. Similarly, Luca's martial arts training, rock climbing adventures, and meditation retreats were all framed as career development rather than expensive hobbies funded by his sister's sacrifice. The most painful aspect wasn't the money itself. It was the way my contributions were simultaneously essential and invisible. At family gatherings, my parents would proudly discuss the twins' latest projects and adventures, detailing their achievements and growth with obvious parental pride. When conversation turned to me, it was brief and focused on my income rather than my actual work accomplishments. Sophia's doing very well in San Francisco, Mom would tell relatives. She has a good job that pays well. The subtext was always clear. My value to the family was economic, not personal. My professional achievements were relevant only insofar as they generated resources that could be redistributed to more deserving family members. The emotional manipulation was subtle but constant. When I expressed frustration about my living conditions or mentioned wanting to save money for my own goals, I was reminded of everything the family had invested in my education and upbringing. "We sacrificed so much to give you opportunities," Dad would say. "Now it's your turn to sacrifice for the family." But the sacrifice was never reciprocal. When I was hospitalized with appendicitis and faced a $4,000 medical bill not covered by insurance, my request for family assistance was met with lectures about the importance of emergency funds and better financial planning. Meanwhile, Marco's request for $2,000 to attend a photography workshop the same month was approved immediately, with my money funding his career development, while I dealt with my medical crisis alone. The financial tracking was meticulous on their end, though they pretended it was casual. Mom kept detailed records of every dollar I sent, but these records were used to justify future requests rather than to acknowledge past contributions. "You helped with Marco's equipment last year," she would say, "so it's only fair that you help Luca with his certification course this year." The assumption was that my support should be equal and ongoing, regardless of my own financial needs or limitations. Holiday and birthday gifts were particularly telling. The twins received expensive, thoughtful presents that reflected genuine knowledge of their interests and aspirations. I received token gifts, usually something under $20 that had clearly been purchased as an afterthought. The message was unmistakable. They were recipients of love and investment, while I was a source of funding that deserved minimal consideration in return. The most devastating realization came during my 20th birthday celebration. While everyone sang "Happy Birthday" and I made a wish over my cake, I overheard Marco quietly ask Mom if he could request money for a new lens that week or if he should wait until after my birthday. Mom's response, "Wait until next week. She might be weird about money on her birthday," revealed that even my birthday was viewed primarily through the lens of optimal fund extraction timing. Over 3 years, I had sent home $92,000 while living like a student, sharing cramped apartments, buying generic groceries, and wearing the same clothes until they fell apart. I told myself it was temporary, that once the twins got established in their careers, the financial burden would shift. But there was never any discussion of timelines, goals, or exit strategies. The arrangement had become permanent in everyone's mind except mine. The breaking point should have come when I realized I had been supporting their lifestyle to such an extent that they had accumulated substantial savings while I lived paycheck to paycheck. During a casual conversation about retirement planning, Dad mentioned their emergency fund had grown to over $30,000. It took several minutes of confused questioning before I understood that my monthly contributions had been so far beyond their actual needs that they were banking the excess without ever mentioning this financial cushion to me. They had been living comfortably on my sacrifices while building wealth they never disclosed, letting me believe they were struggling financially when they were actually more financially secure than I was. The deception was breathtaking in its scope and cruelty. But what finally opened my eyes wasn't a single dramatic revelation. It was the gradual understanding that I had become a ghost in my own family. I existed to generate resources and solve financial problems, but I wasn't included in the life those resources made possible. I was funding adventures I would never be invited to join, supporting dreams I would never be encouraged to pursue, and enabling a lifestyle that had no space for my own needs or aspirations. The Italy vacation announcement would prove to be the final straw, but the foundation for my emotional explosion had been building for years. I just hadn't realized yet that my family saw me not as a daughter and sister, but as a resource to be managed and exploited for the benefit of people whose happiness mattered more than mine. The conversation that changed everything happened on a Tuesday afternoon when Luca called me with what he claimed was an urgent request. His voice carried that particular tone of manufactured crisis that I had learned to recognize over years of family financial emergencies. "Sophia, I need your help with something time-sensitive," he began, launching into a complicated story about a martial arts instructor certification program that required immediate payment or he would lose his spot. The fee was $1,800, and according to him, this certification would finally allow him to start teaching and earning his own income. Something about the story felt off. The urgency, the specific dollar amount, the promises about future earning potential that never materialized from previous investments I had made in his career development. So, for the first time in 3 years, I did something I had never done before. I asked questions. "Which organization is offering the certification?" It's called the International Martial Arts Federation. They're very prestigious. Can you send me the link to their website so I can learn more about the program?" "Why do you need to see their website? Don't you trust me?" "It's not about trust, Luca. I just want to understand what I'm paying for." The conversation became increasingly uncomfortable as my questions revealed gaps and inconsistencies in his story. The deadline was flexible when pressed. The International Martial Arts Federation didn't seem to have a website or verifiable existence. The certification requirements changed each time I asked for clarification. Finally, frustrated by my uncharacteristic scrutiny, Luca made a comment that stopped me cold. "Look, just send the money like you always do. Everyone knows you're going to say yes eventually, so why make this complicated?" The casual dismissal of my concerns, combined with the phrase "everyone knows," made me realize that my family had been discussing my financial contributions in ways that I wasn't aware of. That evening, I decided to do something I had never done before. I asked my tech-savvy friend Marcus to help me investigate whether there were any family group chats or social media conversations that I wasn't included in. What Marcus discovered was worse than anything I could have imagined. There was indeed a group chat that included Mom, Dad, Marco, and Luca, but excluded me entirely. The chat was titled Sophia's Wallet, and it contained 3 years of messages that revealed the true nature of my relationship with my family. The earliest messages in the chat dated back to when I first started my job in San Francisco. "Sophia's making good money now," Mom had written. "We need to be strategic about requests. Can't ask for too much at once or she might get suspicious about how we're spending it." Dad had replied, "I'll handle the big stuff like Marco's equipment. You can take care of Luca's classes and activities. We should space out the requests so she doesn't realize how much we're taking." The clinical calculation in their messages was breathtaking. They had been coordinating their financial requests to maximize extraction while minimizing my awareness of the total amount. Every emergency had been planned, every crisis had been manufactured, every heartfelt explanation about family support had been a deliberate manipulation tactic designed to keep me funding their lifestyle. But the messages weren't just about money, they were about me as a person, and what they revealed was devastating. In their private conversations, I wasn't their accomplished daughter or beloved sister. I was their cash cow, their reliable ATM, their useful workhorse who never asks questions. "The best thing about Sophia," Marco had written, "is that she's so desperate to feel important to the family that she'll pay for anything if we frame it right. She needs to feel like she's helping us succeed." Luca had responded, "Plus she's too busy with work to visit much, so she doesn't know how we're actually living. She probably thinks we're struggling when we're actually doing fine." The casual cruelty was stunning. They had identified my psychological vulnerabilities, my desire to be valued by my family, my guilt about being financially successful while they seemed to struggle, my physical distance that prevented me from seeing their actual living conditions, and weaponized all of it against me. But the most damaging messages were the ones where they mocked my personal life and character. When I had been excited about a promotion, they had joked about how my workaholic tendencies made me a more reliable source of income. When I had mentioned feeling lonely in San Francisco, they had laughed about how my social isolation made me more dependent on family approval. Sophia called crying about work stress again. Dad had written after a particularly difficult week when I had reached out for emotional support. I listened for a few minutes and then steered the conversation toward Marco's photography exhibition fees. She's so grateful when anyone pays attention to her that she'll fund anything to keep the conversation going. Reading that message felt like being stabbed in the heart. I had called my father during one of the lowest points of my professional life, genuinely needing support and connection, and he had seen it as an opportunity to extract money while providing fake emotional comfort. The group chat also revealed long-term financial planning that I was completely unaware of. They had been tracking my salary, my living expenses, and my sending patterns to optimize their requests and maximize their take from my income. Mom had created spreadsheets projecting how much money they could expect from me over time, with different scenarios based on potential promotions or life changes. If Sophia gets married or has kids, our funding stream might be compromised, one message read. We should maximize what we can get while she's still single and focused on work. Maybe encourage her to work more hours or pursue that management position she mentioned. They had been actively manipulating my life choices to maintain their access to my money, discouraging romantic relationships and encouraging career focus, not because they wanted me to be happy and successful, but because they wanted me to remain a reliable source of income without competing priorities. But the discovery that finally broke my heart came in messages about the Italy vacation. The trip hadn't been a spontaneous decision or a special family celebration. It had been planned for 8 months, funded entirely by money they had saved from my monthly contributions, and designed specifically to exclude me from the beginning. We should book the Italy trip for just the 4 of us, Mom had written 6 months earlier. Sophia would want to come if we mentioned it, but she'd also want to control everything since she'd probably end up paying for parts of it. Better to plan it ourselves and present it as a fait accompli. Dad had agreed. Plus, she's so work-focused, she probably can't take time off anyway. We can frame it as a family bonding trip for people who actually spend time together. Marco had added, we should make sure she keeps sending money right up until we leave. Maybe tell her about some urgent expenses so she doesn't have extra cash to book her own trip to Italy. Luca's contribution was the most cruel. What if we tell her the trip is for people who contribute to family harmony, not just money? She sends cash, but she's not really present for family stuff. It's not technically lying. They had been planning my exclusion for months, using my own money to fund a vacation designed to punish me for the very sacrifices I was making to support them. The psychological manipulation was so sophisticated and cruel that I wondered if they were even capable of genuine human emotion. The final insult came in messages from the week before our dinner. They had been strategizing about how to announce the trip in a way that would make me feel excluded without giving me grounds to complain or demand inclusion. We need to be careful about how we present this, Mom had written. If we're too obvious about excluding her, she might get upset and cut off funding. But if we invite her, she'll want to control the whole trip and probably lecture us about budgets. The solution they had developed was perfect in its cruelty. Announce the trip as a reward for family members who contribute in non-financial ways, implying that my monetary support was somehow less valuable than their physical presence at family events I often couldn't attend due to work and distance. As I finished reading through 3 years of messages, I felt something I had never experienced before, complete clarity about my relationship with my family. The confusion, guilt, and self-doubt that had plagued me for years suddenly made perfect sense. I hadn't been imagining their coldness or misinterpreting their behavior. I had been living as the victim of a long-term financial exploitation scheme run by people who viewed me as a resource rather than a relative. But I also felt something else, cold, calculating rage. They had systematically betrayed my trust, exploited my generosity, and mocked my love while planning elaborate schemes to exclude me from the life my money had made possible. They had turned my desperate desire for family connection into a weapon against me. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to confront them about the group chat immediately. Instead, I was going to attend their dinner, let them make their announcement about the Italy vacation, and give them exactly what they had been planning, a daughter who finally understood her true value to the family. But this time, I wouldn't be playing the role of the grateful provider who accepted exclusion with quiet dignity. I would be playing the role of someone who had finally learned to match their energy, someone who understood that love and loyalty were supposed to flow both ways. The dinner was going to be more educational than they anticipated. I spent the entire week after discovering Sophia's wallet, planning my approach to the family dinner. Unlike the impulsive confrontations you see in movies, I wanted this to be strategic and controlled. After 3 years of systematic manipulation, they deserved to experience some consequences for their choices, but I wanted those consequences to be delivered with the same calculated precision they had used against me. First, I documented everything. I took screenshots of every message in the group chat, organized them chronologically, and created a comprehensive file showing the pattern of deception and financial exploitation. I also pulled together bank statements showing every transfer I had made to my family over 3 years, creating a clear financial picture of exactly how much money they had extracted from my income while mocking my generosity. Next, I did something I had never done before. I researched my legal position regarding family financial support. Could they claim I owed them continued assistance? Did I have any recourse for money obtained through deception? A family law attorney in San Francisco assured me that I had no legal obligation to support adult family members and could stop all financial assistance immediately without legal consequences. Finally, I planned my performance for the dinner. I knew they would announce the Italy vacation in a way designed to exclude me while making the exclusion seem reasonable and justified. I was going to let them do exactly that, but this time I would be watching their performance with full knowledge of their script. I arrived at their Sacramento home Friday evening to find the dining room table set with the good china and candles, the kind of formal presentation they used for special announcements or celebrations. Mom had prepared osso buco, my favorite dish, which I now recognized as a manipulation tactic designed to make me feel special and loved before delivering news that would actually be hurtful and exclusionary. The conversation during dinner was unnaturally cheerful and inclusive, with everyone asking about my work and life in San Francisco with fake enthusiasm. Marco showed me photos from his latest photography project, funded by my money, and Luca demonstrated some martial arts moves he had learned in classes, also funded by my money. Dad complimented my success and talked about how proud he was of my professional achievements. The performance was flawless, and if I hadn't read their private messages, I would have felt genuinely loved and valued. But knowing their true feelings made every gesture feel like a calculated manipulation designed to soften me up for whatever announcement was coming. As Mom served dessert, tiramisu from my favorite bakery, another obvious manipulation tactic, Dad cleared his throat and began what was clearly a rehearsed speech. Sophia, honey, we wanted to have you over tonight because we have some exciting news to share with you. Your mother and I have been doing some financial planning, and we've realized we have enough saved up for a special family trip. I nodded encouragingly, playing the role of the excited daughter who was about to be included in something wonderful. We've booked a 2-week vacation to Italy for next month. We're going to visit Rome, Florence, Venice, and the Amalfi Coast. It's going to be the trip of a lifetime. That sounds amazing, I said, waiting for the invitation that I knew wasn't coming. Mom took over the narrative, her voice taking on that sweetly reasonable tone she used when she was about to say something hurtful while pretending it was logical and fair. We've decided this trip is going to be for family members who really contribute to our family harmony and togetherness. You know how important family time is to us, and we want this to be a bonding experience for people who prioritize being present and involved in each other's lives. There it was, the carefully crafted exclusion that painted my financial support as somehow less valuable than physical presence, while ignoring the fact that my work schedule and distance made frequent visits difficult. Italy's for those who contribute, she continued, looking around the table at everyone except me. Not just in one way, but in all the ways that matter to family relationships. The silence that followed was deafening. Marco and Luca stared at their plates, clearly uncomfortable with the cruelty of the moment, but not brave enough to speak up. Dad nodded approvingly at Mom's speech, as if she had articulated something profound about family values rather than delivered a calculated insult designed to hurt me while maintaining plausible deniability. I waited for someone to look at me, to acknowledge that I was sitting right there listening to them explain why I wasn't worthy of inclusion in a family vacation funded by my own money. But no one made eye contact. They all stared at the table, the walls, their hands anywhere but at the daughter and sister they were systematically excluding from their celebration. Finally, I broke the silence with what I hoped sounded like genuine curiosity rather than anger. That's really interesting, Mom. Can you help me understand what you mean by contributing to the family? Because I want to make sure I understand the criteria you're using. Mom's eyes darted nervously around the table. This wasn't the response they had expected. They had probably anticipated hurt feelings, maybe some tears, possibly an argument they could use to justify their decision. They hadn't expected me to ask for clarification like I was trying to learn something. Well, spending time together, being present for family events, participating in family activities. The twins are always here, always involved in what we're doing. They make an effort to be part of our lives. I see. So physical presence is the main factor. Physical and emotional presence, Dad jumped in, clearly trying to support Mom's position. Being involved in the day-to-day life of the family, not just checking in occasionally. That makes sense, I agreed. And what about financial contributions? Do those factor into your definition of family contribution? The question hung in the air like a live grenade. They couldn't say yes without acknowledging that I had been contributing significantly for 3 years. But they couldn't say no without admitting that they were deliberately ignoring my financial support in their calculations. Marco finally spoke up, his voice uncertain. I think Mom and Dad mean that money isn't the only way to contribute to a family. Of course not, I agreed. Money definitely isn't the only way. But I'm curious whether it's considered a way to contribute at all, or if financial support doesn't count in your family value system. Mom was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Sophia, we appreciate everything you do. I'm not asking about appreciation, I interrupted gently. I'm asking about contribution. You said Italy is for family members who contribute. I'm just trying to understand whether sending money counts as contributing, or if that's somehow different from the kinds of contributions that earn vacation invitations. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. They were trapped between their desire to maintain the fiction that financial support didn't create obligations and their need to justify excluding the person who had been funding their lifestyle for 3 years. Finally, Dad tried to regain control of the conversation. Sophia, I think you're overanalyzing this. We're just saying that family is about more than money. It's about being there for each other emotionally and physically. I completely agree that family is about more than money, Dad. But I noticed that nobody answered my question about whether financial support counts as contribution at all. Luca fidgeted in his chair, clearly wanting this conversation to end. Does it really matter? I mean, we're all family regardless. It matters to me, I said calmly, because I'm trying to understand the rules. If financial support isn't considered a form of family contribution, then I've been confused about my role for the past 3 years. The phrase "the past 3 years" landed like a bomb. Everyone at the table knew exactly what I was referring to: the monthly transfers, the emergency funds, the equipment purchases, the class fees, all the money I had sent home while living like a student in an expensive city. Mom tried to redirect. Honey, we don't think of it that way. You help because you love us, not because you expect something in return. Of course I help because I love you. But that doesn't answer my question about whether helping counts as contributing. Because if it doesn't, then maybe I should reallocate my resources toward forms of contribution that do count. The threat was subtle but unmistakable. For the first time in the conversation, everyone was looking directly at me, and I could see panic beginning to creep into their expressions. What do you mean? Mom asked, her voice tight with sudden anxiety. I mean, maybe I should focus my energy on the kinds of contributions that earn vacation invitations instead of the kinds that don't. Since you've made it clear that financial support isn't really contribution in the way that matters to this family. I stood up from the table and gathered my purse, preparing to leave while they were still processing the implications of what I had just said. "Thank you for clarifying the family values for me," I said, my voice remaining calm and pleasant. "It's really helpful to understand exactly where I stand and what kinds of contributions you value. Have a wonderful time in Italy. I hope it's everything you've planned for." The last phrase was loaded with meaning that only I understood. I knew they had been planning this exclusion for months, and I wanted them to know that their secret wasn't as secret as they thought. As I walked toward the door, I could hear them starting to argue among themselves in urgent whispers. But it was too late for damage control. They had finally shown me exactly who they were and what I meant to them, and I had finally accepted their message. The real education was about to begin. I drove back to my hotel room that Friday night with complete clarity about what needed to happen next. For 3 years, I had been funding a family that saw me as a resource rather than a relative, and I had just been publicly excluded from a vacation that my own money had made possible. The time for subtle hints and gentle boundaries had passed. It was time for direct action that would force them to confront the reality of their financial situation without my support. The first step was immediate and irreversible. I opened my banking app and began systematically canceling every automatic transfer, standing order, and recurring payment I had set up for my family over the past 3 years. The monthly $2,500 family support payment, the automatic coverage for Marco's photography equipment insurance, Luca's gym membership and class fees, even the small monthly contribution to their grocery budget. All of it disappeared with a few taps on my phone screen. But I didn't stop there. I also canceled the credit card I had given them for emergencies, changed the beneficiaries on my insurance policies and retirement accounts, and removed my family members from my phone plan that had been saving them $200 monthly on their cellular service. Then I did something I had never done before. I calculated the exact amount of money I had sent them over 3 years and the monthly savings I would experience by cutting off their access to my income. The numbers were staggering. I had been sending them $33,600 annually while living on the financial equivalent of a $44,400 salary in one of the most expensive cities in America. Starting immediately, I would have an extra $2,800 monthly to spend on my own life. The psychological relief was immediate and overwhelming. For the first time in 3 years, my entire paycheck belonged to me. I could make financial decisions based on my own needs and goals rather than calculating how much I could afford to send home while still covering my basic expenses. But I also knew that my family's reaction would be swift and predictable. They would panic when they realized their funding source had been cut off, and they would attempt to restore access through the same manipulation tactics that had worked for years. I needed to be prepared for their damage control campaign. The campaign began exactly 14 hours after I left their house. My phone started ringing at 8 a.m. Saturday morning with a call from Mom, followed by increasingly frantic messages from various family members throughout the weekend. Mom's first voicemail was a masterpiece of manufactured confusion. "Honey, I'm getting notifications that some of your automatic payments didn't go through this month. I'm sure it's just a banking error, but can you call me when you get a chance? I don't want there to be any problems with your accounts." The assumption that I would immediately call to fix the error and restore their funding revealed how confident they were in their ability to manipulate me back into compliance. But I had learned something important from reading their group chat. Their desperation would make them reveal their true priorities and feelings much faster than any confrontation I could initiate. By Saturday evening, when I hadn't responded to any of their messages or fixed the banking error, the tone shifted dramatically. Dad's Saturday night voicemail was more direct. "Sophia, we need to talk. I don't know what kind of game you're playing with these payment cancellations, but this isn't how family handles disagreements. Call me back immediately so we can resolve this like adults." The phrase, "what kind of game you're playing," was particularly revealing. He saw my financial independence as a manipulation tactic rather than a legitimate boundary. In his mind, my money belonged to them, and withholding it was a form of emotional blackmail rather than a natural consequence of their treatment of me. Marco's approach was to appeal to our sibling relationship. "Soph, I don't know what happened at dinner last night, but please don't take it out on the whole family. We all love you and appreciate everything you do for us. Can we please talk this through? But the most illuminating message came from Luca, who was clearly panicking about his immediate financial needs. Sophia, my gym membership got declined today, and they said the card was canceled. I have a martial arts competition next week, and I can't train if I can't use the gym. This is really messing with my preparation. Can you please fix whatever went wrong? None of the messages acknowledged the dinner conversation or addressed the exclusion from the Italy vacation. They were focused entirely on restoring their access to my money, with no recognition that their treatment of me might have consequences for our financial arrangement. By Sunday afternoon, when I still hadn't responded, they moved to their nuclear option, enlisting Mom for an emotional manipulation campaign. Sophia, I'm really hurt and confused by your behavior this weekend. Her Sunday voicemail began, her voice thick with tears that may or may not have been genuine. I don't understand why you're punishing your family because you're upset about the vacation. We can talk about including you if that's what this is about. But cutting off our financial support isn't the way to handle family disagreements. This is cruel and vindictive, and it's not the daughter I raised. The message revealed everything about how they viewed our relationship. In their minds, my financial support wasn't something I chose to provide out of love. It was something they were entitled to receive regardless of how they treated me. They couldn't understand why their behavior might have consequences because they had never seen me as having the right to set boundaries around my resources. But the most telling development came when I checked the Sophia's Wallet group chat, which I still had access to thanks to Marcus's technical assistance. The messages from Saturday and Sunday showed their true feelings about my financial independence and their strategy for regaining control. She's having some kind of breakdown, Mom had written Saturday evening. This is obviously about the Italy trip. We might need to invite her if that's what it takes to get the payments restored. Dad had replied, I'm not going to be blackmailed by my own daughter. She can have her tantrum, but she'll come around when she realizes she's hurting the people she loves. What if she doesn't come around? Marco had asked. What if she's serious about cutting us off? She's not serious, Luca had responded. She needs us more than we need her. She's desperate for family approval, and she knows that money is the only thing that makes her important to us. The casual cruelty of that last message was breathtaking. He had identified the core of my psychological vulnerability, my desperate desire to feel valued by my family, and he understood that I had been using money to purchase their attention and approval. But he had also revealed that they were aware of manipulating this vulnerability and felt comfortable doing so. If she wants to play hardball, Mom had added, we can play hardball too. Cut her out of family events. Stop inviting her to holidays. Make it clear that if she's not going to support the family, she's not going to be part of the family. The threat of emotional abandonment was their final manipulation tactic, and it would have worked on the old Sophia who was desperate for family connection. But the new Sophia, the one who had read 3 years of messages mocking her generosity and planning her exclusion, was no longer afraid of losing people who had never truly valued her in the first place. By Monday morning, they had apparently realized that their usual tactics weren't working and decided to try a different approach. Instead of guilt and threats, they attempted negotiation and bargaining. Dad's Monday voicemail was carefully constructed to sound reasonable and collaborative. Sophia, I've been thinking about our conversation Friday night, and I realize we may have communicated poorly about the vacation situation. Why don't you come up this weekend so we can discuss this properly? I'm sure we can work out something that makes everyone happy. The offer to work out something was clearly a reference to potentially including me in the vacation in exchange for resumed financial support. But it was too little, too late. They had already shown me their true feelings, and I had already made my decision about how to respond. By Tuesday, when they realized that negotiation wasn't working either, they moved to their final strategy, direct confrontation and emotional manipulation that revealed just how desperate they had become. Mom's Tuesday morning call was angry and accusatory. Sophia, this has gone on long enough. You're acting like a spoiled child who didn't get her way, and you're hurting people who love you just to make a point. If you don't restore those payments by the end of this week, there are going to be serious consequences for this family. The threat was vague but unmistakable: continue funding us or face punishment. But instead of fear, I felt something closer to amusement. After 3 years of systematic manipulation, they still believed they could control me through emotional threats and guilt tactics. That Tuesday evening, I finally broke my silence with a single text message to the family group chat. I received all your messages. I'm fine, just focusing on my own financial planning for the first time in 3 years. Have a wonderful trip to Italy. The response was immediate and explosive. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with individual calls and text messages from each family member, all demanding immediate explanations and resolution. But I had said everything I needed to say. They could figure out the rest on their own. That night, I did something I hadn't done in 3 years. I opened a bottle of expensive wine, ordered takeout from my favorite restaurant, and enjoyed a meal that I didn't have to calculate the cost of before purchasing. For the first time since moving to San Francisco, I was living on my actual salary instead of the fraction that remained after supporting 4 other adults. The freedom was intoxicating, but I knew the real test was still coming. They would need to figure out how to fund their lifestyle and their vacation without my support, and based on their private messages, I suspected they had no backup plan beyond manipulating me back into compliance. The full scope of my family's financial dependency became clear over the following 2 weeks as their carefully constructed lifestyle began to crumble without my support. What I had assumed was supplementary assistance turned out to be the foundation of their entire economic existence, and removing that foundation caused a catastrophic collapse that revealed just how little they understood about their actual financial situation. The first crisis emerged within days of my funding cutoff. Marco called me Wednesday morning, his voice shaking with barely controlled panic that had nothing to do with artistic passion and everything to do with imminent financial disaster. Sophia, I need you to understand something. I have a photography exhibition opening next week, and I owe $3,200 for printing, framing, and venue rental. The vendors are demanding payment before they'll release my work, and without this show, I won't have any income for months. The desperation in his voice was real, but it also revealed something important. His thriving photography business that had justified years of equipment purchases was actually a money-losing hobby that generated no sustainable income. That sounds really stressful, Marco. What's your plan for handling the payment? My plan? Sophia, you know I don't have that kind of money. I was counting on your help like always. But I thought your photography was doing well. Haven't you been selling work or booking clients? The silence on his end was long and telling. Finally, he admitted what I had suspected for years. I've sold a few pieces here and there, but not enough to cover expenses. The equipment, the classes, the marketing, it all costs more than I make. But this exhibition could change everything if I can just get through the initial costs. The pattern was familiar. Just one more investment, just one more expense, just one more opportunity that would supposedly transform his hobby into a profitable business. But after 3 years of funding these opportunities, he had yet to achieve financial independence or sustainable income. Marco, I'm not going to fund another photography expense. You're 24 years old, and it's time to figure out how to make your business profitable or find additional income sources. Additional income sources? Sophia, I'm an artist. I can't just work at McDonald's while trying to build my creative career. Why not? Lots of successful artists worked service jobs while developing their craft. There's no shame in earning money to support your dreams. You don't understand how the art world works. If I take a regular job, I won't have time for photography, and my career will stagnate. The entitlement was breathtaking. In his mind, his artistic aspirations exempted him from the financial realities that everyone else had to navigate. He believed that pursuing creative work gave him the right to be supported by others indefinitely, without any obligation to generate income or contribute to his own survival. The second major crisis came from Luca, whose martial arts training had apparently created financial commitments that extended far beyond monthly gym fees. Sophia, I have a serious problem, he began during a Thursday evening call that interrupted my first relaxing dinner at home in months. I signed up for a martial arts tournament circuit that requires a $5,000 commitment for training camps, travel expenses, and competition fees. The first payment is due this week, and if I don't pay, I'll be banned from competing for 2 years. That sounds like a significant financial commitment, Luca. Did you check with anyone before signing up for something that expensive? I thought you'd be okay with it since it's for my career development. This tournament circuit is where talent scouts look for new instructors and potential martial arts actors. The conversation revealed that he had been making financial commitments based on assumptions about my continued support, without ever discussing these plans with me or considering whether I could afford them. Luca, I never agreed to fund a $5,000 martial arts tournament circuit. That's more money than I spend on my own living expenses in 2 months. But you've always supported my training before. How is this different? It's different because I didn't know you were making financial commitments on my behalf without asking me first. And it's different because I'm no longer funding family members' lifestyle choices. Lifestyle choices? Sophia, this isn't a hobby. This is my career path. What income have you generated from martial arts in the past 3 years? Again, the silence was telling. When he finally responded, his voice was defensive and angry. It takes time to build a career in martial arts. You can't expect immediate returns on training investments. I understand that career development takes time. But after 3 years of training that I funded, you should have some measurable progress toward generating income. Do you have any paying students? Any instructor positions? Any competitions where you've earned prize money? It doesn't work that way, Sophia. You're thinking about this like a business instead of understanding the long-term development process for athletic careers. The conversation was a perfect example of how my family had learned to reframe their financial dependency as investment in their potential rather than acknowledgement of their current lack of productivity. But the most revealing crisis came from my parents, whose financial situation turned out to be far more precarious than I had ever realized. Dad called me Friday afternoon with news that shattered my assumptions about their economic stability. Sophia, we need to have a serious conversation. Your mother and I went to the bank this morning to finalize some details for the Italy trip, and we discovered that our savings account balance is much lower than we expected. What do you mean? The account that we thought had $30,000 only has about $8,000. Apparently, we've been spending more than we realized over the past few months, and with your payments stopping, we don't have enough to cover the vacation and our regular expenses. The news was shocking, but not for the reasons he intended. They had told me they had a substantial emergency fund, but apparently that fund had been spent on lifestyle expenses while my contributions covered their basic needs. Dad, I'm confused. A few months ago, you mentioned having over $30,000 saved. What happened to that money? We used some of it for home improvements, some for the twins' activities, some for our own expenses. We didn't realize how quickly it would add up. So you spent your savings on discretionary expenses while using my money for necessities. It wasn't intentional, Sophia. We got comfortable knowing that you were helping with the regular bills, so we felt like our savings could be used for other things. The admission revealed the true nature of our financial relationship. My contributions hadn't been supplementary assistance. They had been enabling my parents to live beyond their means while depleting their own resources on wants rather than needs. Dad, it sounds like you need to make some decisions about priorities. You can probably still afford the Italy trip if you're willing to live more modestly for the rest of the year. Live more modestly? Sophia, we're not young anymore. We've worked hard our whole lives, and we deserve to enjoy our remaining good years. We can't go back to living like college students. I'm not suggesting you live like college students. I'm suggesting you live within your actual income instead of within the lifestyle my contributions made possible. But we've already booked the trip. We've told all our friends. Your mother has bought new clothes and guidebooks. We can't cancel now. The conversation revealed that their public announcement of the vacation had created social pressures that made cancellation emotionally difficult even if it became financially necessary. They had used the trip as a status symbol, and backing down would require admitting their financial limitations to their social circle. But the most devastating revelation came when I asked about their long-term financial planning. Dad, what's your retirement strategy? How are you planning to support yourselves as you get older? Well, we were hoping that with your continued help and the twins eventually getting established, we'd be able to maintain our current lifestyle indefinitely. The words hit me like a physical blow. They hadn't been viewing my contributions as temporary assistance during a difficult period. They had been counting on my support as a permanent solution to their retirement funding shortfall. In their minds, I wasn't their daughter who was helping during an emergency. I was their retirement plan. Dad, I'm 27 years old. I need to save for my own retirement, my own emergencies, my own future. I can't be your long-term financial strategy. But you're doing so well, and you don't have the same expenses we do. We raised you. We invested in your education. We supported your dreams. Doesn't that create some obligation for you to help us in our later years? The conversation revealed the fundamental disconnect in our relationship. They saw my success as a family asset to be shared rather than an individual achievement to be respected. They believed that their past investment in my childhood created a permanent claim on my future earnings. As the weekend approached and the full extent of their financial crisis became clear, I realized that my decision to cut off funding hadn't just inconvenienced them. It had exposed the complete unsustainability of their lifestyle and financial planning. They had built their entire existence around my contributions, and without that support, the whole structure was collapsing. The Italy vacation, which had been planned as a celebration of family values and togetherness, while excluding me, was becoming the symbol of their financial dysfunction and the catalyst for long overdue conversations about reality, responsibility, and the difference between wants and needs. 3 weeks after I cut off their funding, the Italy vacation that was supposed to be a celebration of family contribution turned into a financial disaster that exposed every lie my family had been telling themselves about their economic situation. What followed was a series of increasingly desperate attempts to salvage their trip while avoiding the fundamental lifestyle changes that would have made it affordable. The first sign of trouble came when Mom called me in tears on a Tuesday morning, her voice carrying the kind of raw panic that comes from facing unavoidable reality. "Sophia, we have a problem with the Italy trip. The hotel in Rome is demanding payment in full before our arrival, and we don't have enough in our account to cover it plus the other expenses we've already committed to." "That sounds stressful, Mom. What are you planning to do?" "Well, we were hoping maybe you could help us with this one thing. It's only $4,200 for the hotel, and we could pay you back after we get home and figure out our budget." The request was particularly painful because it revealed that she still didn't understand the fundamental problem with our relationship. She wasn't asking for help because of an unexpected emergency. She was asking for help because they had planned a vacation they couldn't afford while assuming I would cover any shortfalls. "Mom, I'm not going to fund a vacation that I wasn't invited to join. You'll need to find a different solution. But we've already committed to everything. We can't cancel now." "Why can't you cancel?" The questions seemed to stump her. After a long pause, she responded with a list of reasons that revealed how thoroughly they had trapped themselves with poor financial planning. "We'll lose our deposits. We already told everyone we're going. Your father bought new luggage. I bought clothes specifically for the trip. We've been planning this for months." Every reason she gave was about sunk costs and social embarrassment rather than actual financial impossibility. They could cancel the trip. They just didn't want to face the consequences of their overcommitment. "Mom, losing deposits is expensive, but it's less expensive than paying for a vacation you can't afford." "But Sophia, this is our dream trip. We may never have another chance to see Italy together as a family." "You're not going as a family, Mom. Remember? Italy is for people who contribute in the ways that matter to your family." The reminder of her own words created an uncomfortable silence. She couldn't argue with the exclusion principle she had articulated, but she also couldn't admit that the trip was unaffordable without acknowledging that they had been living beyond their means. The second crisis came from Marco, whose photography exhibition had become another financial disaster that he expected me to solve. "Sophia, the exhibition was a complete failure," he called to report the following week, his voice mixing disappointment with expectation. "Only 3 people showed up, and nobody bought anything. Now I owe money for the venue and printing costs, and I don't have any way to pay it back." "That's disappointing, Marco. What did you learn from the experience?" "I learned that the local art scene isn't sophisticated enough to appreciate my work. But that's not the point right now. The point is that I owe $3,200, and if I don't pay it, it's going to ruin my reputation in the art community. How are you planning to handle the payment? I was hoping you could help me out this one time, and then I'll focus on building more sustainable income streams. The phrase, "this one time," was particularly galling because it ignored 3 years of one-time requests that had never led to financial independence or sustainable income generation. Marco, I'm not going to pay for your exhibition expenses. You made a business decision to invest in this show, and now you need to handle the financial consequences of that decision. But I can't handle it. I don't have that kind of money, and I can't get a regular job because it would interfere with my artistic development. Then maybe it's time to reconsider your approach to artistic development. Maybe you need to find ways to support yourself while pursuing your art, like millions of other artists do. Sophia, you don't understand the creative process. If I compromise my artistic integrity by working for money, I'll lose the authenticity that makes my work valuable. The conversation revealed the extent to which my financial support had enabled him to avoid engaging with economic reality. He had developed an identity as an artist that was completely divorced from market forces, customer needs, or business sustainability. But the most dramatic crisis came from Luca, whose martial arts commitments had created a web of financial obligations that extended far beyond what any reasonable person would consider recreational activity. Sophia, I'm in serious trouble, he called me Thursday evening, his voice shaking with genuine fear. I signed contracts for the tournament circuit, personal training sessions, and specialized equipment leasing. If I can't make the payments, they're threatening to sue me for breach of contract. How much money are we talking about, Luca? About $12,000 in immediate obligations, plus ongoing monthly commitments of around $800. The numbers were staggering, more than I spent on housing, food, and transportation combined for several months. He had essentially committed to payments that exceeded the income of many full-time workers while having no reliable income himself. Luca, how did you sign contracts for that much money without having a plan to pay for them? I thought you would help me. I've never had to worry about money before because you always come through when the family needs something. The casual assumption that I would fund $12,000 in martial arts expenses revealed how completely my family had internalized their dependence on my income. They weren't just expecting help with necessities, they were making major life decisions based on assumptions about my continued financial support. I'm not going to pay for contracts you signed without my knowledge or approval. You'll need to figure out how to handle this situation yourself. But I can't handle it myself. I don't have any money, and I don't have any skills that would let me earn this kind of money quickly. Then maybe you need to develop some skills, or find legal ways to get out of these contracts, or face the consequences of commitments you couldn't afford. Sophia, please. If I don't pay these contracts, it's going to ruin my credit and my reputation in the martial arts community. I might have to declare bankruptcy. Then declare bankruptcy. That's what happens when people make financial commitments they can't fulfill. The conversation was perhaps the most difficult I had ever had with any family member, but it was also the most necessary. They had all become so comfortable with my support that they had stopped developing their own problem-solving abilities or financial responsibility. Meanwhile, as each family member dealt with their individual financial crises, the Italy vacation continued to hang over everything like a symbol of their refusal to accept reality. 2 weeks before their scheduled departure, Dad called with an update that revealed just how desperately they were clinging to their original plan despite overwhelming evidence that it was unaffordable. Sophia, we've figured out a way to make the Italy trip work. We're going to use credit cards for the expenses we can't cover with cash, and then we'll pay them off gradually over the next year. Dad, that sounds like a plan to go into debt for a vacation. It's not debt if we pay it off. And we've worked hard our whole lives. We deserve this experience. How are you planning to pay off credit cards without my monthly contributions to your budget? The question highlighted the fundamental flaw in their reasoning. They were planning to solve their current financial shortfall by creating future financial obligations they would be even less equipped to handle. We'll figure it out. Maybe the twins will start contributing more to household expenses once they get established. Maybe you'll change your mind about helping once you've had time to cool down. The response revealed that they still viewed my financial independence as a temporary tantrum rather than a permanent boundary, and they were planning their entire financial future around the assumption that I would eventually resume funding their lifestyle. Dad, I'm not going to change my mind. You need to make financial plans that don't depend on my income. But Sophia, we're your parents. We raised you, we love you, we've always been there for you. Doesn't family loyalty mean anything to you? Family loyalty works both ways, Dad. And part of loyalty is not exploiting people you love or taking them for granted. The conversation ended badly, with Dad accusing me of abandoning the family and me pointing out that they had excluded me from the very vacation they were asking me to fund. As their departure date approached, I realized that they were actually going to follow through with their plan to use credit cards for a vacation they couldn't afford, rather than face the social embarrassment of canceling or the lifestyle adjustments that would make it affordable. They were choosing financial disaster over admitting they had overextended themselves, and they were doing it while still expecting me to eventually bail them out of the consequences of their poor decisions. The Italy vacation was becoming exactly what it had always been, a symbol of their entitlement, their financial irresponsibility, and their complete inability to understand that actions have consequences even when you're used to having someone else handle those consequences for you. 6 months after the infamous Italy dinner that changed everything, I was sitting in my new one-bedroom apartment in San Francisco's Mission District, a beautiful space with hardwood floors, bay windows, and a view of the city's skyline that I never could have afforded while funding my family's lifestyle. The $2,800 I was no longer sending home monthly had transformed my life in ways I never could have imagined. The apartment was just the most visible change. I had also paid off my credit cards, built an emergency fund with 6 months of expenses, started contributing to a retirement account, and for the first time in 3 years, I was living like someone who actually earned a decent salary in tech rather than someone who was perpetually broke despite professional success. But the most significant change was psychological. I had finally learned to make decisions based on my own needs and desires rather than calculating how much I could afford to give away while still surviving. I bought groceries without checking my account balance first. I made plans with friends without worrying about whether I could afford dinner out. I purchased clothes that fit properly instead of wearing the same items until they fell apart. The transformation hadn't been without emotional costs. The first few months after cutting off financial support had been painful, filled with guilt, anxiety, and genuine grief about the loss of family relationships I had thought were based on love, but turned out to be based on economic utility. But that grief had gradually been replaced by something healthier, genuine self-respect, and a clear understanding of my own worth that didn't depend on other people's approval or my usefulness to them. The Italy vacation had indeed happened, exactly as Dad had planned. They used credit cards to fund the entire trip, accumulating $18,000 in debt for 2 weeks of travel that they documented extensively on social media with photos of themselves looking happy and carefree in Rome, Florence, and Venice. What they didn't document publicly were the financial consequences that followed. Within 2 months of returning home, they were struggling to make minimum payments on the credit cards they had maxed out for the trip. Marco's photography equipment was repossessed when he couldn't make payments on his leasing agreements. Luca had indeed declared bankruptcy and moved back home full-time, working at a local gym for minimum wage while his martial arts career dreams evaporated. The most significant development had been Mom and Dad's forced lifestyle adjustments. Without my monthly contributions, they had been unable to maintain their mortgage payments and had eventually sold the house, moving into a modest rental apartment that they could afford on Dad's part-time income and Mom's new job at a local retail store. The social embarrassment of downsizing had been harder for them to handle than the financial adjustments. They had spent years presenting themselves to their community as successful parents whose children had achieved professional success and financial stability. Having to explain why they had sold their house and were working retail jobs in their 60s was a blow to their pride that created more stress than the actual reduction in their living standards. But perhaps the most surprising development was that they seemed happier. Not financially comfortable, certainly, but more grounded in reality and more focused on relationships rather than lifestyle maintenance. The first genuine conversation I had with any family member came 8 months after the Italy dinner, when Marco called me with news that didn't involve a financial request. "Sophia, I wanted to let you know that I got a job," he said, his voice carrying none of the entitled expectation I had grown accustomed to over years of crisis calls. "That's great, Marco. What kind of job?" "I'm working at a camera store downtown. It's not glamorous, but I'm learning about different equipment and working with customers who are genuinely interested in photography. And I'm making enough money to cover my own expenses for the first time in my adult life." The pride in his voice was different from anything I had heard from him before. It was the satisfaction that comes from earning your own way rather than the hollow confidence that comes from having your lifestyle funded by someone else. "How does it feel to be financially independent?" "Weird, but good. I never realized how much stress I was carrying about money when I was depending on you to solve all my problems. Now I know exactly what I can afford and what I can't, and it's actually kind of liberating." The conversation continued for 30 minutes, the longest non-crisis phone call we had ever had. Marco told me about his work, his plans for slowly rebuilding his photography practice as a sustainable business, and his new understanding of the relationship between artistic integrity and financial responsibility. "Sophia, I need to tell you something," he said near the end of our call. "I read through some of our old family group chat messages, and I'm horrified by the way we talked about you. The things we said, the way we planned to manipulate you, it was cruel and wrong, and I'm ashamed that I participated in it." The apology was everything I had wanted to hear for years, but more importantly, it was accompanied by evidence of genuine change rather than just promises to do better in the future. Similar conversations happened with other family members over the following months. Luca called to tell me he was enrolled in community college, studying business administration while working at the gym, and had developed a much more realistic understanding of what it takes to build a sustainable career. "I spent years thinking that wanting something was the same as deserving it," he admitted during one of our conversations. "I never understood that dreams require work and sacrifice and planning. I thought that if I was passionate about something, other people should support it financially until it became profitable." Even Mom and Dad eventually called, though their conversations were more difficult and took several attempts before we reached genuine communication. "Sophia, I need you to know that we understand now what we did to you," Mom said during our most honest conversation to date. "We turned you into our parent instead of treating you like our daughter. We used your love for us as a weapon to control your money, and we convinced ourselves that this was normal family support instead of recognizing it as financial abuse." The word abuse had never been used in any of our previous conversations, and hearing Mom acknowledge it felt like a breakthrough that I hadn't expected. "We don't know how to undo the damage we did," she continued, "but we want you to know that we're learning to take care of ourselves now, and we're not going to ask you for money again. We want to have a relationship with you that's based on love and respect, not financial transactions." The rebuilding process was slow and sometimes painful. There were setbacks, moments when old patterns of manipulation would resurface, conversations that ended badly because someone fell back into entitled expectations about my resources. But there were also genuine breakthroughs. Family phone calls where no one mentioned money or asked for anything. Holiday gifts that were thoughtful rather than expensive, chosen because they reflected knowledge of my interests rather than obligation to reciprocate my financial generosity. The most meaningful moment came a year after the Italy dinner, when I received a card from my entire family on my birthday. Instead of the usual token gifts, they had written individual letters acknowledging what they had learned about themselves and our relationships over the past year. Dad's letter was perhaps the most moving. "Sophia, I want you to know that watching you set boundaries with us was the kick in the pants I needed to take responsibility for my own life. For the first time in decades, I'm proud of the work I do and the money I earn. I'm proud that I can support your mother without depending on anyone else. And I'm proud of the daughter who was strong enough to say no when we were taking advantage of her generosity." As I sit here today, sharing this story with all of you, I'm struck by how much my life has changed since I found the courage to walk away from that dinner table where I was excluded from a vacation my own money had funded. The Italy trip that was supposed to punish me for not contributing in the right Ways actually freed me to discover what my life could look like when I prioritized my own well-being. The most surprising discovery was that my family members weren't fundamentally bad people. They were people who had been trapped in roles that prevented them from developing their own capabilities and self-worth. When I removed myself as their solution to every financial problem, they were forced to discover that they were capable of much more than they had ever given themselves credit for. The question I want to leave you with is this: are there relationships in your life where you've become the solution to other people's problems in ways that prevent them from growing and developing their own capabilities? Have you ever found yourself funding experiences you weren't invited to enjoy, or supporting people who took your generosity for granted while excluding you from the benefits of that generosity? And here's the deeper question: when you finally set boundaries with people who were taking advantage of your kindness, did it destroy those relationships or force them to become healthier and more honest? Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is stop enabling their dysfunction and let them discover their own strength and capacity for responsibility. I'd love to hear your stories about financial boundaries with family, dealing with relatives who saw you as a resource rather than a person, or discovering that the people you were supporting were capable of much more than they showed you when they were dependent on your help. Drop your experiences in the comments below. These stories help other people understand that they're not selfish for wanting to be valued for more than their bank account. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about family dynamics, financial boundaries, and the courage it takes to choose self-respect over people-pleasing. Share this video with anyone who might be struggling with similar family financial manipulation. Sometimes knowing that others have successfully navigated these situations can provide the courage to make necessary changes. Thank you for listening to my story and for being part of this community where we can talk honestly about the complex realities of family relationships and personal boundaries. Remember that loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your own well-being to fund their poor choices, and that sometimes the most generous thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's dependence on your resources. Don't forget to comment with your own boundary-setting experiences, like this video if it helped you process your own family financial dynamics, subscribe for more honest conversations about difficult family situations, and share this story with anyone who needs to hear that their financial resources don't determine their worth as a family member. Until next time, remember that you have the right to be included in the experiences your generosity makes possible, and that healthy relationships are based on mutual respect and genuine care rather than financial transactions disguised as family loyalty. Sometimes the people who exclude you from Italy while spending your money to get there are showing you exactly who they are, and it's okay to believe them and act accordingly.